Wondering how your mindset affects your life? How to bring more energy into your business and life? Millions of people around the world ask these same questions daily. You are in the right place. Learn practices that will help give your life the meaning and success you've been searching for. Welcome to the Charge Podcast, teaching you how to create habits around real goals every day. Practical life advice from those who made it. Here's your host, Gary Wilbers.
Hey Chargers, we created a learning library on our website just for you. Go to chargepodcast.com and click on the link Learning Center. We have articles like 7 steps to build your morning routine, 8 tips to manage stress. We also created some free downloads for you like 8 steps to replace work fatigue and productivity and recovery. Or how about 20 productivity hacks? These resources are made just for you. Remember, go to chargepodcast.com and click on the Learning Center. Welcome, Chargers. We're glad to have you back again this week for another great guest and another great podcast. Man, I don't know about you, but 2022 is flying by. We are in that fourth quarter and kind of that final stage. And what I've set this quarter up to really be with our guests are people that can help us really get out the gate fast in 2023, because we're finalizing things up. But the key is the faster you get started in 2023 for your goals and things that you want to accomplish, that's going to help you get that start. So today I've got that guest with us, and Beth is with us. Before I introduce her, though, I want to ask Beth, what problem will you solve for our Charge Podcast listeners today?
Well, I really help people solve for the bumps in the road. So we know that there's lots of change that goes on, both personal and if you're in an organization, and there's always bumps along the road. And I help people solve for those bumps, either to avoid them all together or to really go over them and take what they can out of them and make it into a good bump, so to speak.
Well, we want good bumps because 2023 is going to be a little bit different, I think, as we all believe that and know that. And as business owners and entrepreneurs, we have to change. And today, Beth Banks Cohn, I'm going to mess that up. I told her even in the side of it, and I did, but that's okay. Beth understands. She has a PhD and is an accomplished organizational consultant, and she's an executive coach and a thought leader with more than 25 years of business success. Beth's valuable asset is she helps companies use organizational and individuals use personal transformation to reach the next level of growth. Beth, it is great to have you on the Charge Podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, you talked about those bumps in the road, and we've discussed that a little bit and why it's so important. You've talked about it, but the big thing is really we realize that those bumps in the road happen a lot of times during change and transformation. And people have a hard time sometimes dealing with that. And even organizations as a whole, we say we want to have change, but of course they have a hard time dealing with that. So can you share with us, why is that change and transformation so difficult to deal with?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with where we are in our lives. So one change 3 years ago might not have been such a big deal, but today with the pandemic and with everything that's been going on in our country, I think that people are just a little bit more sensitive to it. And so it's just harder. And I just think people say, oh, well, we need to be resilient. Well, I agree. We need to be resilient, but we're often not resilient, or we're not as resilient as we think we are. And so definitely always want to work on that part of it, right? Always want to work on building our resiliency. But we also need to realize that change really hits us differently depending on what's going on in the rest of our life. We can't separate, we can't say, oh, well, that's a business change. That has nothing to do with my life. Everything in your life has to do with your life. And so maybe something's not as settled at home, and then business change really affects you. Maybe things are great at home, and so a business change doesn't affect you as much. And from an organizational perspective, you have, let's say, 1,000 people in your organization, 500, even 50 or 40. Every single person has a different reaction to the change that you're about to go through. And you have to be able to harness that in some way and get people to be able to move through the change the way that they need to, but also the way that the organization needs them to.
Yeah. And I think that's the key. I think you really nailed it there, is how everybody expresses it differently. I've been an entrepreneur, so I like creating change, but there are certain parts of my life I don't. When it comes to technology, even though I was in the technology industry for 22 years, now I'm slow to adopt. But the thing is, it's how we take it and kind of our mindset to it that we create that. So in businesses, we have to look at that because it's so critical, because if we want to get them to change to how we're transforming our company, we have to get over that. So the question I think really comes up to is, what can we do as an individual do during these organizational changes to really cope? But also, how can we then contribute to that success instead of being that person that is actually holding everybody back?
So I think the first thing is to really own our reaction to the change, and to realize that, especially if we've been in business for a while, that we have good reasons for those reactions, but we need to own it, right? So the organization announces a change. I don't agree with it. I don't think it's the right move. I have to own that. Now, I may not think it's the right move, but we all know there's more than one way to be successful in business. And so I need to take into consideration, I need to research it a little bit, ask some questions. Why are you doing this? Why aren't you doing this? And to really educate myself, but in an active way, and in a way that really helps me then say, okay, I might not agree with it, but I understand it. And so therefore I can get behind it because I'm willing to give it a chance. And also be thinking about it from a sort of believing in the idea. Like, often organizations say, oh, we're going to change and it's going to help us, we're going to get a $10 million lift. It's really hard to get emotionally connected to that unless I'm going to get the $10 million.
Yeah.
Right? So it's really being able to find what is in it really for me as an individual in the organization. What can I learn from it? Does it give me an opportunity for career growth? Does it give me an opportunity for learning something new? Does it give me an opportunity to learn more about the business as a whole? So how can I find my connection to it, even if the organization isn't connecting me? And then as an organization, really trying to help people connect to it, not just say it's about the money, but really talking about the other reasons that you're doing it from a business perspective. And then the last one is really thinking about how does this affect how I work? Because sometimes businesses make changes and it really makes my job into something that I'm not so happy about. But again, I need to own that and say, okay, I'm not happy about it, so I'm going to try it in the new way, but realizing that I may or may not be successful in a way that makes me feel fulfilled. And so I may need to be looking elsewhere to go to another organization and bring my talent somewhere else. But to really own that for yourself and not think of it as being a victim, but more, this is the way the business needs to go. And I need to either decide I'm with them or I'm not, and I'm going to go somewhere else. And it's easier to say that than do it. I've done it. But I get that it's easier to say that and do that. But I do think sometimes our jobs turn into something that we just aren't interested in anymore. And we, instead of staying and trying to sort of fight against it, we need to really take responsibility and say, you know what, this isn't for me anymore. I need to bring my talents to another place.
Yeah. Well, I love those because you have to believe in the idea. Otherwise, you're not going to change. And then what you talk about, what's in it for me, and connecting that to the people, because that's the thing that some organizations forget. I'm sure you've seen it many, many times over your 25 years. They forget about the people side of it. The organization doesn't change. The people have to change inside the organization to make the organization change. And then realizing if it's right for you or not. Perfect example I'm sure we all could give is, if we look just back 2-3 years, you and I are doing this via Zoom so we can see each other. They're only hearing the audio portion of this, but now people are very comfortable. But just think back 3 years ago, Zoom was this little bitty company that hardly anybody heard about. But today it's changed the way we do business. I can coach clients on it. I can have meetings on it. I don't have to fly to Texas or New York or somewhere else, and I'm still able to do the business. So I know salespeople said, oh, I like that one-on-one, and I like that personal touch just like anybody else. But just think of the amount of things that you can cover in a week if your client would prefer. A lot of them will prefer you to do Zoom meeting versus meeting in person. So that's the thing that we have to think about is how are those changes actually going to benefit us in the long run? I don't know about you, but I've flown recently and it's not a whole lot of fun being in airports.
Not anymore.
Not anymore, for sure. Because it's crazy, and don't have to worry about getting a vehicle and then getting the hotel and stuff. I mean, I love to travel when I want to, right. But to travel all the time for business, no, that's not always fun. So I think that brings up my next question that I really wanted to ask you is, along this process, we talked about some of the things that's good, but what can somebody do to really avoid those pesky bumps in the road so they have that change process? Besides, you gave some great suggestions there that the individual has to do, but what's some things that we can do to avoid those pesky bumps?
Well, from an organizational perspective, organizations need to really focus, just as you said, on the people side. I mean, that is my business. That's what I do. I help organizations focus on the people side because it's not just about the business decision, to your point before, it's about the people. And you have to engage the people. And organizations really haven't done that. Or they say, oh, well, people already know how to change. We've been doing so much change lately. They're used to it. And I always say to them, they're not used to it. They're tired of it.
Yeah.
So you have to really think about what you're introducing, but also really focusing on the people side of it so that you can really take advantage of everything that your people bring to the organization. Because I think that's a really important component, I think. And I think it's really paying attention to the 3 parts of the mind, like that cognitive part, right? The part that's really about evaluating, like knowledge isn't enough. We used to say, companies used to say, we just need to tell them about the change. We just need to communicate more. And I always say to them, no, you need to listen more, right? Because people need to not just know about it. They need to really be able to say to themselves, okay, that makes sense. I would say to companies, you hire these really intelligent people, and then you expect them to roll over when you say, oh, we're just going to do this. And they're not going to think about it. They're just going to do it. Like, it's unrealistic.
And so nobody wants to be robots anymore.
That's right. Those days have long passed. And so being able to really give people the tools to say, you know what? Okay, now I've analyzed it. Now I can accept it. Now I understand it. And to really take into consideration from an organizational perspective, if you're really radically changing someone's job, you really need to help them understand what that means to them and also what it means to the organization. Because sometimes even companies really forget that if you're going to change someone's job, like, you didn't hire them into that job, you hired them into a different job, and now you've changed it, but you want them to be just as productive, and it doesn't actually work that way. So I think that from an organizational perspective, really taking into consideration all 3 parts of the mind is important. And I think and that can really help you to avoid those bumps in the road, avoid those bumps in the road. The other thing is to an organization, we said this before, if you've been changing constantly over and over and over again, and you're not giving people a chance to breathe in between, people aren't going to be able to perform the way you're wanting them to. People are tired anyway. The pandemic exhausted us. And now you're introducing all these changes into the atmosphere. You really do have to challenge yourself as an organization to say, is this really necessary? It's like, they used to say, don't get married, move your house, and change your job at the same time. Like, it's that kind of exhaustion that we're facing right now. And I think companies are just hitting themselves if they think they can just keep introducing change and making their organizations more profitable by putting more turbulence into the system. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but at least go into it with your eyes open and understand what's possible and what's not possible.
Yeah, and really decide what is your people need, the employees, so you're listening to them as you're starting to make those changes, because otherwise you're just doing the exhaustion side. And then you wonder why the change is not successful. It's because they feel like they haven't been listened to. So of course they don't accept it. Goes back to our first initial thought. And you wonder, well, why didn't that go successful? Well, the people rejected it, basically, is what happens then through that process. Yeah, it really makes sense because, you know, the world is changing, business is changing. I tell people it doesn't matter if it's business, education, government, everything is changing. But the thing is, there has been a lot put on us the last few years that we have really changed how we do business, and organizations have to look at the whole picture instead of just one area. And I think that's so critical because a lot of times as leaders, we're the problem. You know, we create these changes and we forget about, to make this really successful, the people have to be part of it. And I had a conversation recently with a guest, and he was talking about, we got to get rid of these silos. You know, we make it from the top and then the bottom is supposed to just automatically do it. How can they be part of that process? And I think that becomes a big key to it.
Yes. And I have a framework that I use when I go into an organization to work on change. And in that framework, I have them really think about how this change is going to affect every person in the company. Not so much each individual, but more like by job titles, right? So what's it going to do to the person that sells or markets or manufactures, and even down to the person when we didn't have so much hybrid work, people that were cleaning the buildings. Like, how does it affect really everybody, so that you can get a real clear understanding of the impact of what you're about to enter into. Sometimes companies on paper, decisions look amazing, right? Somebody ran the numbers. Yeah. Looks perfect. But in reality, it isn't going to go the way you need it to go, because you may not have the capabilities. You may not have the capacity. You may not have the emotional wherewithal, because especially if it's a change that includes layoffs or reorganizations, and then you really have to take into consideration the emotional impact of those. And so I always say, on paper it always looks 100%, but it's just never quite works out that way.
Yeah, and part of the problem with that is they check out the capital, even maybe what the revenue means, but they always forget about the human capital. And the challenge that creates through that process. Well, I think my question I'd like to ask you from that, we talked a little bit about this and kind of around it, but we not directly is, and change seems to be so much more complex since the pandemic. You and I both kind of mentioned that, but it also is more critical for organizations because companies are they're doing it differently, just as I talked about. I can sit on a sales call and I can do it via Zoom or video conference versus actually going to that place. And that saves a lot of dollars, saves a lot of times, gives me a lot of more personal time with my family. So it makes a big change. But what can people do to really help them to get the organizations to realize that critical component of why it's so important? What can they do about it with all these changes that's coming about?
So I think it is, especially for leaders and organizations, it is critical that leaders and organizations get really clear about what the outcome's going to be, right? Because sometimes in the past, organizations have said, "Oh, well, we'll change and we'll see what happens, and maybe it'll work. We think we're going to get this, and we'll try." But I think organizations need to be more strategic about it now around the changes, because there is a lot of change going on just in general, right? Hybrid work or remote work, and although you'd think, once again, we'd be really good at it by now because we've been doing it for a really long time, we're in many ways we're not. And so really focusing on the things that will help make people's lives better. Like when you make changes that make people's lives better in your organization, you're going to reap that benefit 100-fold. So for example, if you haven't already done so during the pandemic and you're still fully remote or hybrid, really making the changes that make that work for everybody, right? So if it's remote work, really investing in helping people understand how team building or how working on teams is different remotely or in a hybrid world, and really not just helping them understand it and training them, but also supporting them, getting them coaching if they need it, getting them other kinds of support that they might not have gotten in the past, so that it can help everybody really work to their full potential. I think one of the things that companies have been doing lately, which is a little disconcerting for me, is that they've been saying, well, it's not really working as well, so I'm going to go back to the way it was, right? My remote didn't work the way I thought it was going to work, and so we're going to go, everybody has to come back in the office. But that doesn't work for everybody anymore either. And so really being able to help people, help companies, help their people bring their best to work, I think is something that companies now are beginning to forget about. At the beginning of the pandemic, it was an amazing thing, right? And then we've slowly sort of forgotten it. So I think it's really focusing on how can you make life better for your human capital so that you can get more capital, right? Get more revenue, because happy people make productive employees. There's no question about that. But sometimes leaders forget that.
Yeah, that's one I'm seeing is organizations are figuring out how this change is going to go. And some people are saying, just like you said, they're saying now it's this way for everybody. But the only problem is that will not work for everyone. And then understanding that some are different. I've got a 22-year-old son that's going to graduate college this spring. And one of the things he does not want at this point in time in his career, he does not want remote work. I asked him, I said, what are you looking for? What do you want? And I said, do you want a hybrid? You want a remote? And he goes, well, if I did hybrid, I'd only want it 2 days a week that I'm hybrid and 3 days in the office, because he wants that interaction with people, because he's going to be new to the workforce and he thinks he needs to learn more from others. But there's somebody else that could be just the opposite of my son and they want total remote. But we have to decide. And if we're going to find that human capital, we're going to have to be the companies that's willing to change the way we do business to be able to have that transform. Because I've got examples after example of people that, are going to find what is available and what they think they want. Now, we don't know when somebody goes remote totally, it may not be what they like, and they may have to change positions to be able to find what they do. But people are trying to figure that out themselves. So organizations have to at the same time. What's some great information for organizations? What a practical topic right now, because as they go into 2023 and they're thinking about what that needs to be, if they really realize that they're change and transformation and keeping, I think the key we really hit on is their human capital in mind, that's going to make the difference of it being successful or a failure.
Yes. And I think the more organizations, especially leaders, but really everybody, can look out into their organization and really take a holistic view and look at their organization holistically. It's not just about what sales does or what marketing does or what manufacturing does, but it's what everybody does across the board. Like you said before, getting out of silos. I think now more than ever, once they do that and they really see what's going on across the board, they can really take advantage of that. People want to work for successful companies and they want to be successful in their jobs. Like nobody wakes up in the morning and says, oh, today I'm going to work because I want to fail. Like nobody says that, right? They want to succeed. And so it's companies who can really build that foundation to really help each individual succeed. And there's lots of other things that go into that, right? Diversity and equity and inclusion and really, how people are treated, making sure that people managers are really great people managers, making sure leaders are the kinds of leaders that people would want to follow. Like there's lots of things that you can do, but really being honest about when you look across your organization, what's lacking, what's not, and also what's really working for you. Like, what do you do amazingly well as an organization, and really exploit that, right? Because it's not just about fixing what's wrong, but it's about what do we do really well that's almost like part of our DNA that we really want to exploit. And at an individual level as well, like what do I as an individual, what do I do really well? And how can I really bring that to bear on to my job, to my organization, so that I can not just be successful, but feel really great about being successful.
Yeah. Well, Beth, I truly appreciate you sharing your expertise. I'm not going to let you go yet because we've got the recharge round. But if you would, go ahead and share with them if they wanted to reach out and connect with you. I know your website, you've got that, and we'll have it all in show notes, and you're on LinkedIn and Facebook. But just share them your website and LinkedIn, whichever you want. And then we will have it in show notes because I know they're busy people. They're not going to be able to write it down right now, but we'll have links so they can easily get to it.
Yeah. So LinkedIn, you can definitely connect to me on LinkedIn. I love when people connect to me there, Beth Banks Cohn, and you can definitely connect with me there. I do have a website, AdraChangeArchitects.com. That's ADRA changearchitects.com. And then you can email me, Beth@AdraChange.com.
Okay. And we'll have all that in show notes at chargepodcast.com for our listeners. So please check that out. Reach out to her if you want to learn more about change, some great information. I checked out her website earlier on the website. So you can check out some articles she's got there as well as other information that's available and reach out to her. Now, before I let you go, though, I ask every listener 2 questions. They're what I call the recharge round. The first one is charge, and that's the mantra of mine of create habits around real goals every day. What habit do you think's led to success in your life, Beth?
I would say my ability to take time off.
Mm.
So really, when I worked a lot. So when I worked for a company, I worked a lot, 40-hour weeks were like a vacation almost. I was very dedicated. And when I started my own business, it was the same way. I would work 7 days a week. And then I got some really great coaching. And one of the first things they said was, you have to take time off, and you have to take full time off. Like, don't check your email, don't answer work calls, don't do the things that you would ordinarily do for work, and really take time off, take time to unplug. And I have to say, being able to recharge, first I would do 1 day, now I do 2 days a week. And sometimes I try to have 3 days a week if I've had extra hard things going on. And so to really be able to just recharge, it actually made me a better entrepreneur, right? Yeah. Because I could, first of all, just having time for my mind to rest, but then also really feeling just so more energized when I started out the week, knowing that I had all of this free time that I could take to really energize myself. It really made a huge difference.
Yeah. Makes you more productive too. At least that's what I see. Because then I don't waste the time through the week, because of course I want that time off that's available to you.
Yes.
Well, thank you for that. My last question to you is, we've all had failures. And one reason I ask this question is I want our listeners to realize that we've made mistakes too, just like they have in their life, but we've recovered from them. What's one of those failures or do-overs, if you had to do it over in life, that you would do if you had that opportunity?
Well, I have to say, for me as a woman, one of the things that I got a lot of feedback about when I worked inside of a corporation was that I was just too assertive, although they always, of course, called me aggressive, right? Too aggressive, too willing to speak the truth, too loud, too everything. I was just too much. And if I had it to do over again, I would say to them, this is who I am, take it or leave it. What I did for many years during the time I was inside of corporations is I tried to fix myself. And it was a dismal failure, because this is who I am. And all of those things make me amazing at what I did when I worked inside of a corporation and what I do now. And allowing people to try to dictate the how I showed up was really detrimental to my success inside of a corporation. And when I went into my own business, I said, you know what, I'm not doing it anymore. This is who I am. And I like who I am. And I love what it allows me to do for organizations as a consultant and for individuals as an executive coach. And so I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not trying to fix myself anymore. Now, it doesn't mean I haven't tried to grow and develop over the years. I definitely still concentrate on that, but I've stopped listening to other people's opinions about what they think I should be or how they think I should be acting.
Super. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And you can tell those differences that you've made, and you're doing some great work. And I appreciate the work that you're doing out there with organizations and companies, helping them with change and transformation. And remember, her website's going to be on our chargepodcast.com link. Please check out Beth. And if you're doing some change and reorganization in your company, you need to check Beth out, because if you really think about the human capital and the process to go through that she walks you through, it's going to make a difference in your business. Now, Chargers, every time we ask our listeners, what did you get out of this? What is your action step? And what I want you to think about is we're getting ready to go into 2023. What change or transformation do you want to make for yourself? And it doesn't even have to be business related. It can be in one of the areas I always talk about, 6 life domains of spiritual health, relationships, professional, financial, or learning, or it can be something else. But what is that change or transformation you want to make? Now, here's what I ask you to do. Write down, what are you going to do about that in 2023 to make that happen for yourself? So you decide, but I guarantee if you write it down and put it in present tense, so if you want to be that person, what is that? And then put it in present tense, and you'll be able to achieve that. Beth, I thank you so much for joining us on the Charge podcast today.
Oh, it was my pleasure. It was such a pleasure to talk with you. Change is my favorite topic, so I'm always happy to have a conversation about it.
Chargers, come back next week and we'll have another great guest. We'll see you next week. Make it a great day.
This podcast is ended, but your life doesn't just stop. To continue your inspiring journey, head over to chargepodcast.com and access all the tools and resources mentioned on today's show. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing with somebody who may also benefit from the advice provided. That's chargepodcast.com. Until next time, charge in business and life.